interesting how high relationship management skills is, because really at that level, it really is about simply connecting with stakeholders and mobilizing people.
Yeah, and I think in South Africa that's also quite complex, you know, with our own transformation challenges. I think relationship management and doing that across different cultures is even more important.
Steve?
From our perspective, probably some of what was uncovered at the time was that many organisations started to feel that to some extent they were in a situation around their financial management which, like myself, you were a little bit out of control of. Your hands were replaced in the destiny of banks, and I think organisations were recognising that to keep the control of their workforce, to keep those people motivated, to try and offer stability and consistency, then management skills were probably as important as anything, in the sense that, I know it's a very old joke, but you're looking for people with real entrepreneurial, motivational capability, and maybe less just around reeling out numbers and more about inspiring people and making them feel why it's important to feel safe about their work and the environment they're in.
More on executive recruitment when we come back. We're talking about the local and international executive recruitment spheres with Anne Pratt and Steve Lucas. Let's go to the second part of that study, Anne. If you can just interpret this for us, please. Are you finding that here in South Africa, that those are valid?
Our experience, certainly at the CEO level, is that employment law knowledge at a very broad level is important, but certainly not from a specialist point of view. I think there's specialists in the organisations that would really guide CEOs in terms of the detail of that. I think proven management ability, absolutely. Track record in terms of leadership, leading teams and inspiring teams, and even to the point of, you know, leadership style and type. And of course, cultural fit with the organisation, I think that's critical. We say that in search, it's really a dance of intimacy, it's a dating game, and if you don't get the cultural fit right, that often means that you haven't created the great marriage and successful partnership.
Now, Steve, there have to be instances where we don't get this right, where we actually place somebody and at first glance it all seems to fit really well, but then a client calls you and says, what went wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, where we have to remember this data comes from is from those groups of people who try and do the best job they can at assessing the right candidate for an organisation. But that differs somewhat from those people on the ground who are interfacing with that individual every day. And I think the subtleties of great managers are those who are in a position to be able to present themselves in a way that can be understood by all groups of people. And I think if Anne would probably concur with the fact that the best CEOs can talk to the most junior staff just as eloquently as they can to the most important shareholders. And I think really what this data probably demonstrates more than anything is the recognition that those people who perform the best are those people who can wear the different guises that are needed within an organisation, especially today where more and more people feel as though they would like to have access to their senior management, and for those senior managers to understand the issues that impact them.
Are you finding in the UK that you've got quality people in the numbers you require, or is there a shortage?
You know, I think the language in the previous years has been a war on talent. There have been all of these shortages. I think what we're seeing more and more is that the organisations are more discerning, they're more understanding of what they need, their brands are becoming more defined, and therefore there's a recognition of the sort of people that work and possibly the sort of people that don't work. And when you start to narrow it down, I recently bought a new car, and if you start the search and then you start to go, well, I need 5 seats, I need this, I need that, actually the number of cars that really fit what you can consider are very few. And I think the same is true in executive search. Actually, when it boils down to it and you've taken account of the needs of an organisation, you're fishing in a very small pool. Not because the talent isn't there, but more because when you finalise the details of an organisation, there aren't that many people out there with the expertise and capability and engagement techniques that will best fit.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think understanding the nuances of a culture are critical, as I said. I think in South Africa we have an added complexity. There is an important need for transformation. And I think in terms of transformation, and again, it depends on the level. So, you know, there's been an age-old debate here. You know, if you look at non-executive directorships on boards, and particularly where we need to transform listed boards, because there the numbers are really low. You know, there's always this age-old thing. On the one hand, do we take the experienced people, but there are very few of them, or do we grow more people who haven't necessarily had that experience at that level, but give them the tools, the resources, the support to make sure they're competent and experienced at that level?
What makes a candidate attractive to an employer beyond just the salary and beyond what we've listed here?
Look, I think from certainly my experience of that would be the understanding, the fact that they've been out there and possibly worked their way up through an organisation, they understand it. I think if we look at those organisations that are excelling, certainly in the UK, US and maybe Australia, where I have probably more experience than elsewhere, what becomes very noticeable is those people who can talk with practical knowledge of what needs to be done are outshining all others by a very long way. And I think it's the leading by example scenario rather than, you know, the old sort of First World War, the generals sat back and sending the people over the trenches. I think that methodology and thinking is now very outdated. And I think those people who are prepared to stand at the front and lead from the front in a Braveheart-esque type of way of thinking probably are the ones who are endearing themselves to the...
But then, Anne, the challenge here in South Africa is, as you've mentioned just now, we don't always have people, especially with the transition in our country, especially with our black economic empowerment policies and so on, you don't always have the kind of person Steve just described.
Perhaps there's certain experience gaps, but in terms of the people attributes, I think there's a commonality there. I think it is about leading from the front. It's about being practical, about being hands-on. I also think what we've certainly seen, CEOs and executives who can really talk to the strategic value add, rather than talking about motherhood and apple pie. You know, it's really about this is what we delivered against these objectives within this time frame. So I think delivery, I think also drive, energy, tenacity, resilience. You know, they say Africa isn't for sissies, and I think if you look at what leaders have to navigate their way through in this country, I think those attributes. I think also, not only in a South African context, but I think globally, the ability to deal with change, with cultural diversity, I think those qualities where people really inherently show that they're able to do that, not because they have to, but because they want to.
I agree with everything you've said right now. It makes perfect sense. As a South African, I understand and see that, and I feel it if I look at the business day and I encounter different executives. But I also hear that as a result of us placing people and making quotas and struggling with that without great mentorship programs, that you are going to encounter the executive who's got all of the attributes you described, but because of the history that we come from, did not have the chance to walk the trenches and work their way up through a company. And there is still a gap. And if a good mentorship program is not in place, that can be a disconnect.
I think that's true, Pat. I think the way many organisations have closed that gap successfully, and you know, I always think of MTN, and I think they've done a great job in their transformation strategy, SAB Miller, their various others. But I think what those organisations have done is hire people with the kind of humility and the willingness to get into the trenches, but also put support systems around them and grow them into the job.
More when we come back.